Can you see? Can you see my screen?
Yes, I can see your screen. So thank you very much, Amar, for sparing time again today to bring this very important topic in the limelight for those who are new to the topic and those who are looking for some more recent information, recent development in the space of ESG reporting frameworks. What we have seen in the past couple of months that there is a rapid change in things, or particularly in the EU, things have changed, and I think there is a need for us to stay updated with the progress. And I really appreciate your efforts in bringing these topics up in your content, in your video lessons as well. So let's start the process. For the audience, we may have some audience joining in later on, but predominantly it is our expert Amar Malik is going to share uh, three major topics, and within this big broader topic, and we learn from him. And if I have any question, I will ask. Once this video is available on LinkedIn and on YouTube, you can always ask questions, and Amar would be happy to respond. So over to you, Amar.
Thanks a lot, Hamad. A pleasure to be presenting this. What is our second session on the subject of ESG and its reporting frameworks, right? And like we mentioned in our invite as well, there are three agenda points that we're going to cover in this one. We're going to once again, just like in our first session, we're going to look at the key ESG reporting frameworks. I think this agenda point is going to be the mainstay in our future events as well. We'll have to always come back to our anchor point on what are the key ESG reporting frameworks. And then we'll talk about the adoption of these reporting frameworks in various countries and jurisdictions. Yeah. So many of our listeners would be interested in knowing what's happening in their jurisdiction. But if they are basically operating out of multiple jurisdictions, then what is happening across the globe on that, on the front of ESG. And then in the end, we'll come to the one aspect of ESG, which is the E, the environment. I use a different terminology for environment, which is more like a scientific terminology called biosphere. And we'll see the environmental aspects of ESG with regards to its three components. Yeah. So let's dive into it then. We'll first go and look at the key reporting frameworks. Now, as of now, there are three main organizations around the world that are driving the adoption of ESG reporting standards. Now, let's be clear. These are not the only three organizations, and these are not the only reporting standards, but the three big organizations which will have the most impact across the globe in adoption of ESG. So the first one is, of course, the one leading the pack is EFRAG, which has issued ESRS, which is the short form of European Sustainability Reporting Standards. And this is applicable, like it says, to the European bloc, the EU bloc. EFRAG has issued 12 standards. 5 of them are focused on the environmental side, 4 of them on social side. 1 concerns governance, and then there are 2 generalized or cross-cutting standards. Important thing to note here is that the EU, these ESRS EU standards are applicable from this year, from year 2024. So they have done what we call a phased out implementation. So a selected cluster of companies have to start reporting from 2024, right? And those are the large public interest entities which have employees more than 500. So that's the first group, which will start in 2024. And then more and more companies will start coming into the net of this ESG reporting as we go to 2025, 2026, and onwards. So the first reports of European sustainability based on the ESRS will come out in the start of 2025, which will be based on the first year of 2024. Yeah. Now, before I move, let me skip to the third line first. So after EFRAG, the other one is the FASB, Financial Accounting Standards Board. This is a accounting standard setting body based out of US. And they have, in collaboration with another agency called TCFD, helped the state of California issue the first set of standards for adoption. So that's the first US state that has issued a law, which is called SB 261, adopting the environmental and the ESG standards. So as per that law, SB 261, so the standards become effective from 2025. So naturally, the first reports will come out in 2026. Yeah. So then comes the middle part, and why I left the IFRS sustainability to the end is because IFRS sustainability, while it's a voluntary adoption, this is going to become one of the most widely adopted standards out of EU and US. So we talked about EU and talked about US, but other than these two jurisdictions, IFRS, the other countries and jurisdictions will be mostly adopting the IFRS sustainability standards in its entirety or some modified version of it. Yeah. So IFRS sustainability has issued two standards. First is a generic framework, foundation, which sets the foundation, and S1, and then there's a climate-related standard, S2. Now let's look at the adoption of these standards across various jurisdictions, right? Like I said that the EU bloc, and before I jump into the individual jurisdictions, so let me just talk a little about the standards adoption process. So what happens is that the first, as soon as the ESG regulations come out, individual jurisdictions, the countries, they basically take up those regulations. They basically form a body or an organization which is responsible for basically leading the ESG project in their respective countries. So that body basically goes and studies those set of standards and then opens up what we call a consultation period. So what is a consultation period? Consultation period is a time, it has a deadline during which comments are invited from that jurisdiction, from various members of the economy, be it the public sector, the private sector, the bankers, some special interest groups. So they will basically provide comments on the adoption of it. Yeah. Once the consultation period is closed, then that body basically goes and studies the comments, analyzes that, and as soon as they publish their analysis, most probably with that analysis, they will also publish an adoption date. Yeah. And then a government body would will announce some kind of a law, which will take that recommendation and make it a part of that country's law. So that's a little bit of a process of adoption of these standards. Now, and that's how we have basically set up this slide. If you see, there are countries, and then the responsible body is the organization that is leading the adoption of those standards in that country. Consultation status, what is the status of the consultation period, and then the adoption status. You can see that EU bloc, has already adopted the standards. Consultation done. From this year, from 2024, they have started deploying their ESG practices, and they're supposed to report, and the first reports will come out in 2025. Apart from this, you can see that Hong Kong and Singapore, they have also closed their consultation period, and they are expected to announce year 2025 as the first year of adoption. Yeah, and then for the participants who are from UK side, please be on the lookout. There is an announcement which is going to happen in July, by end of July or by end of August. Yeah. And most probably, if not 2025, then 2026 is probably going to be the first year of adoption. And then you can see some other jurisdictions which have already closed the consultation period. So they will start, some of them have started in 2023 and closed in 2024. One other jurisdiction which stands out is Turkey. And Turkey basically has also, along with EU, that's another jurisdiction that has adopted the ISSB standards, which is the IFRS sustainability standards, in 2024. Yeah, so they have started with the listed companies should report starting from 2024. And then the list goes on. Brazil is Now, Brazil is a very unique case. So their consultation is still open, but they have already announced that by 2026, we are going to start adopting it. So whatever happens in the consultation, we are going to consider those comments, but from 2026, we are going to start adopting these standards. And the first reports then you will see coming out in 2027. So you can see that these are the main jurisdictions, the G20 countries, EU and US I talked about in my first slide. This is the adoption status. And in our subsequent sessions, Hamad, what we plan to do is to just give an update on this jurisdictional adoption. So our listeners would know, okay, what is happening in my country? Because if you're part of a organization which has a print across multiple continents, or even if you are running a consultancy across various countries, so you may want to basically look at the adoption of these standards across multiple countries, right? So that's a little bit about jurisdictional adoption. We'll now move on to talking about a certain aspect of ESG standards, the disclosures. And we will talk once again about the environment, the E component of the ESG. Like I said in my first slide, I use the word biosphere for environment. Biosphere is more in tune with the more scientific terminology. And I basically distribute the biosphere into three components. So you have air, which is called atmosphere. You have water, which is hydrosphere. And when you talk about water, it's all the oceans and the seas and the marine life in those waters as well. And the third one is the geosphere or the lithosphere, which is the earth. If you think about it, our environment is made up of these three components. There is no other component. Some would say, okay, there is also the fire is an element, is a natural element. But then fire, if you think about the geothermal energy that's deep inside Earth's crust, and that is not mostly at risk. The risky elements are these three elements which are at risk. And that's why the ESG standards and regulations talk extensively across these three components of environment. Yeah, we'll just quickly look at some of the main metrics that you will need to report under each of these three components of environment. So starting from atmosphere and air, if you remember, Hamad, we did touch upon the emissions reporting in our first, So I will just say very quickly, so atmospheric or air-based disclosures are surrounded around the 7 greenhouse gases. Yeah, we call them GHGs. So if your operations or your business is involved in emission of one or more of these 7 GHGs, then you'll have to follow a particular standard for emissions reporting, categorized in scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. Yeah. Now here's the good part about the atmosphere or air. Yeah, it might look very complicated, and as much as such it might be, but all the three reporting frameworks, I'll just go back a little bit. All the three reporting frameworks, IFRAG, IFRS Sustainability, and FASB, they all point to a single set of standards for atmospheric. So if you have basically complied with that standard, you are in compliance for atmospheric disclosures across IFRAG, across IFRS, across FASB, and TCFD. Yeah, and that single standard is called the GHG protocol, which is the heart. You can see on the top right side, GHG protocol corporate standard, which basically defines all the carbon accounting. It defines the scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 emissions. Yeah, so the job is a little bit easier over here. So you can just go through the GHG corporate protocol corporate standard. If you become an expert of it, you can do your atmospheric disclosures easily. Then comes the hydrosphere, the water element. And for that, the only framework which talks right now about the water and marine resources is the European standards. Like I mentioned, the Europeans are the most comprehensive standards. There are 12 standards that they have issued across the ESG, and the 5 of them are focused on the environmental side. One of those 5, the E3 standard, talks about water, its consumption, and provides some metrics. Now, when it talks about water, it talks about the surface water and the groundwater. The surface water would be the water that is being utilized from lakes, rivers, and seas. The groundwater is something which you are basically pulling from the ground. That will be the aquifers and the, which is deep below the Earth's surface. And basically what we need to report is your water management. So on the left column, you can see the water management, how much water you are withdrawing, how much water you are consuming, and then how much water you are discharging back and recycling. Yeah. And also, if you are a multinational company and you are operating out of multiple jurisdictions, and then some of those jurisdictions are under water stress, so then that is something that you need to basically disclose separately. Also, you have to disclose the water intensity, which is you disclose it in terms of water withdrawal in cubic meter per monetary unit. So the total water withdrawal that you do from these water reservoirs divided by your revenue, in US dollars or whichever currency, and you get this metric. And then the third pillar of this is also marine resources, the fish and the flora and the fauna that you extract from these water reservoirs. So that needs to be disclosed. And then another standard within the ESRS, E2, basically talks about the water pollution. So if you are in a manufacturing industry, you're releasing an effluent, which then goes ultimately into a water reservoir. So you have to basically disclose of it. How much cubic meter do you release? Where does it go? How do you plan to manage it? Now, once you decide these metrics, once you're reporting on these metrics, you also have to report on basically the absolute values, as well as if you have any targets to reduce the consumption of water. And what are your policies and procedures? What are your action plans towards the reduction of the use of water, on managing basically the use of water, right? So a little bit of a flavor on the hydrosphere side, something which we did not cover in our first section, but we will basically expand on it. Element of the environment, and that talks mostly about the resource use and circular economy. Yeah. For circular economy, I would refer our participants to our event, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was back in November. We basically touched upon the basics of circular economy over there. So here, what you're doing is the input resources, the raw material, the minerals, the metal, whatever you are using in, the resources that are flowing in and the resources that are flowing out, as well as any waste that you produce, and what do you do with that waste? Basically, do you throw it in the water? Do you basically bury it deep inside the land? Do you basically do incineration? Do you burn the waste, releasing those, once again, the atmospheric, GHGs? And if you recycle the waste, so these are some of the key metrics that you will have to report within the category of geosphere. Just a basic flavor of the environment, the three components of environment, and then probably in the next session we will we'll do a deep dive into each one of them one by one. Yeah. So that's a little about our the presentation that I wanted to just take our participants through. And then over to you, back to you, Hamad.
Thank you very much. I have maybe one question here, and I see Sidra Khalid has joined us. So if Sidra has a question, you can also please unmute yourself or turn on your camera and ask. So my question is, there are many countries that have not adopted in the process, consultative process. Is it is there a study, or is there an organization which is actually monitoring the consultative process? Because coming from South Asia, I know most of the consultative process actually does not happen the way it should happen. Is there anything happening on the? I mean, is there any monitoring body which is actually doing that?
Actually, like I said, in terms of the responsible body or the organization that is driving in each jurisdiction, that's separate. So if you see on the slide, for EU bloc, it's IFRAG. For Hong Kong, it's their own stock exchange. And then if you come to, let's say, in India, it's Reserve Bank of India. It's a central bank which is doing it. Yeah. And then if you go to the Canada, your jurisdiction. Yeah. So there is a special board that they have mentioned, the Canadian Sustainability Standards Board. If you see the Japan and South Korea, they have also formed special boards. But if you want to monitor all of them, if you want to see that, okay, where each country is, then, basically that's what I do a day in, day out. I keep an eye on that. But you can also go to the IFRS sustainability website, which you see on this slide in the middle. Go to the IFRS sustainability, type the search windows, and they will show you status of each consultation process, as well as a link to if the consultation has closed and if the comments have been published. Okay. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah. Because ultimately, if there's no monitoring, then of course it will become almost useless. The whole exercise would become futile if most of the companies have not actually adopted the standards. Then
yeah, and then just to add, these bodies are working in most of the countries under some ministries or some government or public sector entity. So as soon as their analysis of the comments and consultation is complete, then they send the recommendation, and then it becomes a part of the law. Right. Just like it has become in the EU, and just like it has become in Turkey already.
Okay. So the next challenge would be as soon as, well, actually, I would say the challenge has already started, because eventually it will become a law. Eventually people will have to follow it, which means that the practitioners have to be fully aware of how to do these reporting and how to follow these reporting standards to meet the requirement of the law. I think that's going to be an interesting thing, because a lot of capacity building would be required for all the chartered accountants and auditors who are doing who are in the process. So thank you, Sidra. If you have any question, you may ask, please.
Yeah, no questions as yet. Thank you for asking.
Okay.
I'm just trying to get acquainted with the whole, progress and procedure around the ESG reporting guidelines. So, thank you. No questions yet.
Okay. So what we will do, we will actually upload this video as well on YouTube and share the link. So Amar would share this link in one of his posts or newsletter. So if you follow Amar, you can, if you don't follow Amar, please start following him. That's number one. Number two is that please contribute, because ultimately we all have to come together to raise the voice and share more knowledge around the topic to a wider community. So with that, thank you very much, Amar, for joining today on a Sunday in Netherlands, from the Netherlands, and sharing this knowledge. And of course, the idea is to spread this information to a wider community as far as we could go. So Sidra, thank you for your participation as well. We're expecting more people, but if one person stays with you and engages with you, that's probably is a good starting point. So hopefully we will be able to join in the next session in a month's time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So Amar, would you stay, Amar, for a while?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.